Welcome to Discovering Possibilities with me, your host, Kevin Kervick. This is my first show on Access Nashua, and I'm really glad to be here. I hosted a similar show on Portsmouth Public Meeting House television last year that I thought went pretty well, and we're hoping that we can replicate some of the same quality here in Nashua. Tonight I thought I would spend a little bit of time talking about my philosophy and also some of the content for future shows. But first, a little bit about my own journey. I'm a marriage and family therapist by training, and after a while, about 20 years of doing that work, I started to get a little frustrated with the inability to be involved at larger spheres of influence, and I was finding myself being frustrated with working with one family at a time and wanted to work with whole communities a little bit more. So I decided to get more involved with community building, with politics, systems reform, kind of bigger picture stuff, and that provided an outlet for some of those other energies that I had. So it's been a gradual transition for me away from kind of standard family therapy and into some kind of bigger picture stuff. So this is the continuation of that journey for me. I'm a father and husband. I just celebrated my 30th wedding anniversary with my wife, Karen. We have 2 children in their 20s, late 20s. So this is actually a kind of an empty nest period of time for me. So that's the other reason that I'm trying to do some other things, because I have more time in my life to kind of expand my horizons a little bit. I've worked in multiple capacities in the human services field. So I've had practically every job you can think of in the mental health field, from kind of program director to psychiatric technician to therapist to group therapist to director of programs. So I have kind of a broad experience working in human services. And my sort of bias is that I really feel like the system isn't working really well. So some of what you'll hear on my show is some frustration with how the field is working or not working, and a lot of suggestions with how to make things work a little bit better. And along with that, is my field really making a difference in society, or are we kind of getting in the way? Could we do some things a little bit differently? So I have a little bit of a pessimistic outlook on that, and some ideas for reform that I really want to bring out on the show, and especially with some of the guests that I'm going to invite that might have some creative ideas along those lines. So this is really a way of talking about systems reform, hopefully with a large enough audience that we can really make a difference and have some impact in terms of the field at large. So in addition to my work in human services, I've branched out into teaching. I teach college, so I teach sociology at a couple of different universities, and I'm always looking for more adjunct work in case there's some schools out there that are looking to hire somebody. But sociology has given me a chance to look at kind of the big picture instead of the individual. So I've also taught psychology and family therapy in the past, but I'd like to really talk about society at large and the kind of the American community rather than kind of individual families. So I'm really enjoying that, and I'm going to bring some of that perspective in here as well. But I really want the show to be about discovering possibilities, and by that I mean kind of an optimistic outlook for how could we improve the American community? What can we do differently as a people to make our American community work better? And with that, what can individuals do so that they can be, they can be inclusive in that community? And since there's an interdependent relationship between, the community and the individual, if we can improve the community, then individuals will be happier. If we can create more individual happiness, then the community will thrive as well. So we're going to try to look at both of those angles, kind of the community angle and the individual angle, and see if we can find some kind of a marriage between the two. So hopefully my guests will be people that are looking at kind of big picture community issues, like maybe some political issues and some sort of health and happiness, community systems kind of issues. And then we'll have some people just talking about their own lives, and maybe people that have been successful in community life, or maybe people that want to be successful and are looking for some ideas. So we'll try to cover both aspects of that, okay? I've also been trained as an authentic happiness coach. So that's sort of a glorified therapist, although we tend to focus more on kind of future positive-based things rather than kind of past and problems. So I'm going to hopefully be able to expound on that authentic happiness coaching on the television show, so that if anybody out there is interested in learning about some happiness techniques or some things that lead to a happier life, they'll want to tune in, okay? Before I forget, I'd also love it if folks would email or call in with some suggestions for shows. I'm very flexible and creative and interested in learning from other people, but I'd also like to really respond to the needs that are out there. So if you have suggestions for a show, feel free to get a hold of me, and I'll see if we can really work it in some way, okay? Okay, so with that, I have kind of a working philosophy. So I'm not kind of a blank slate coach or therapist. I have a working philosophy that kind of guides how I think about the world and how I approach the world, how I approach my work. I tried to capture that in a book that I self-published a couple of years ago called Discovering Possibility. So I'm taking the name of the show from the name of the book. And it really was a full-scale kind of community restoration plan. So, you know, if somebody were to entrust me with making decisions for the community, these are the things I would suggest doing. So it was my way of kind of dealing with some existential angst I was feeling about society, and maybe offering some contributions to try to move things forward. So that sort of philosophy is captured in the book, and the kind of activist working aspect of that I call common sense community building. And I'll talk about that more specifically as we go along, you know, what that really refers to. But it really is the sort of active community intervention plan that I would suggest. So it's kind of community organizing or community mobilizing, but from a perspective that I really, really support. And I think you might find that my perspective is a little different than perhaps you've heard before. Okay. Unlike a lot of family therapists or people in human services generally, I come from a bit more of a traditionalist perspective. Most family therapists would probably describe themselves as liberal or progressive. You know, I would talk about myself more as maybe a common sense conservative or a traditionalist, or even a libertarian to some extent. So my philosophy is going to really embody that, I think. And I think that's a strength of mine, because I think I'm hopefully offering kind of an iconoclastic viewpoint and maybe something a little bit different than what's been done before. So I think that's a strength of mine. It can be a little bit controversial because it's probably not what folks are used to hearing for the most part. But hopefully that's not such a bad thing. It's actually just a little bit different. And I think given where we are in the American community at this time, I think my approach might be kind of a refreshing alternative for some people. People that describe themselves as libertarian or as conservative or sort of as moderate liberals have tended to be more attracted to my work. There are some people that are probably more on the left of center, pretty far on the left of center, that probably would not be so interested in my ideas. So hopefully they'll still tune in and they'll still want to watch. But that gives you a little bit of an idea where I'm coming from philosophically. I call myself a voluntarist communitarian. And communitarians kind of follow the work of Amitai Etzioni and some folks like that from George Washington University. And primarily we're concerned about the declining kind of moral fabric. I get up on it every day, and when I get kind of depressed about the world, the thing that upsets me most is I just kind of feel like we're getting, the morality is sort of declining around me. You know, I look at media, and I look at the political world and education, human services, business. I just sort of have the sense that, you know, we're really becoming an immoral people. So communitarians are very concerned about kind of shoring up kind of the moral compass in the community. And my basic sense is that if people lived a more virtuous life, and this is sort of, I guess, Aristotelian, or this is maybe from you know, the philosophers, you know, if people lived a more virtuous life, that the communities would begin to thrive again. And until we kind of get back to that, we're really going to struggle. So in some ways, I'm probably more of a evangelist or a missionary, a pastoral missionary than I am a therapist, because I've just gotten to a place where I'm really concerned about you know, morality, about virtue, the lack of virtue, and that's something I really want to talk about a lot. In the past, people have said that I've been able to do that in a non-preachy or non-judgmental kind of a way. But I try to be pretty bold and pretty clear about some of those ideas. And again, that's not something that you often hear from psychotherapists, because we're taught to be kind of value neutral. And I have found that to be an occupational hazard, frankly, because I think it hasn't always been what clients need to hear. So I call myself a voluntarist communitarian, or sometimes I call myself a common sense conservative, or even a kind of a conservatarian, because I have kind of a traditionalist mindset, but I'm very much about deconstruction and about limited government. So sometimes I feel like a libertarian, sometimes I feel like a conservative, sometimes I feel like kind of a nothing, kind of a middle of the road, sort of nothing, don't fit into any of the labels. But generally that's kind of where I find myself going back to. I tend to really be a deconstructionist rather than someone who's trying to add things, because I feel like we've added a lot of things in society, and I'm not really sure we're really having an impact. If you look back over the last 100 years, or especially the last 60 years, gosh, we've added a lot of things, but I'm not really sure we're having a great impact. So my basic approach is, what can we sort of deconstruct or cut back, or how can we thin things out? What fat can we cut, so that people can be more authentic together? I feel like there's just a lot of garbage out there that's really getting in the way of authentic community. So that hopefully will come through loud and clear in my work, that I'm sort of a deconstructionist. So, and again, I think my ideas are iconoclastic, hopefully a little bit unusual, and hopefully that they'll be unusual enough that the viewer will be interested in wanting to tune into some of the other shows. Okay, so I hope that's making sense so far. I think now I wanted to shift gears a little bit and talk about maybe some of the disturbing trends I'm seeing out there in the world today, and why I'm a little bit pessimistic about the present. Although I'm optimistic about the future, I'm kind of pessimistic about the present, and I tend to think that there's a lot of denial out there about just how bad things really are getting. So I suppose it's a little bit of fatalism there, but to me, I feel like it's realism. I think things really are. I think we're struggling right now as a community, and I think we really need to make some fairly drastic changes. So I'm feeling pressure kind of every day to want to contribute to the people, to the body of knowledge that's saying that we really need to make some serious changes pretty quickly. I'm very frustrated that those changes aren't really being made, and I'd like to see us kind of accelerate some of the reform. So a couple trends I've really noticed. An Associated Press survey came out last month, but it was really reported on heavily just this past week, and it suggested that only about 1/3 of Americans believe they can trust their neighbors. So only about 1/3, about 30% of people believe they can actually trust the people that they know in their lives. That number is down. It was about 50% in the mid-1970s. So really in the last, 40 years, we've really declined precipitously, and it was significantly higher before that. After the post-World War II era, 60 to 70% of people were really feeling they could trust their neighbors. So something really has happened over the last several decades, that there's less and less feeling of trust. So one of the things I want to talk about on future shows is, why is that happening? Obviously, there are probably many factors contributing to that, and one's perspective probably is going to contribute to why he or she believes that's happening. So I want to look at that from multiple different angles. I find that to be a really alarming thing, that people are less and less trusting of the people around them. Of course, we know that the Americans' trust in government is at an all-time low. About 6% of people trust Congress. 6%, I mean, that's just abysmal, right? I mean, President Obama's approval rating is down to maybe mid-30s to around 40%, which is the lowest he's ever experienced. So, people tend there's very few institutions that people tend to trust. The military is still kind of holding out, above the 50% mark, but most other institutions are way down. So, but government especially is way down on the list of Americans. I have a lot of friends that just tell me I can't pay attention to any politics at all because I just think they're all a bunch of crooks. I have no interest in even paying attention to anything. So people have just kind of tuned out because they just feel like there's no hope there. So I'm not in that camp. I still believe that there's some hope, but I do believe that we really deteriorated, and I believe it's partly our fault, but partly also the fault of the political establishment. So trust in people, trust in government is at an all-time low. Rates of depression and anxiety are skyrocketing. You know, since around 1990, particularly when antidepressants became in fore, the rates of depression and anxiety are up by about tenfold. I mean, we're in an epidemic in the United States with depression and anxiety. It seems like pretty much everybody you know is talking about depression or anxiety or is on some kind of medication, psychotropic medication to deal with that. I'm real concerned about that. What is it about our culture that's leading to so much depression and anxiety? Is it the trust thing? Is it the internet? Is it, the politics? What is it? So I really want to talk about what are the things that are contributing to so much depression and anxiety. And I have a lot of really tangible recommendations, I think, particularly from the happiness research about what people can do to alleviate depression and anxiety. And a lot of this stuff really does work, and it's empirically validated. So I'll look at that from the individual level, but also from the society level. What could we be doing differently that would really contribute to a less stressed out, less depressogenic kind of community? Okay. I feel as if working families are under siege. We're seeing this sort of dramatic difference between, sort of the upper middle class and upper class in society and the working class or the lower working class. And if you look at the indicators, kind of societal indicators, what you find is that the upper middle class is actually doing very, very well, and it's still doing very well by comparison with the rest of the world. But the working class, the middle class folks are really falling behind. I mean, it's almost as if they've kind of fallen off a cliff in just really the last 10 years, 10 to 20 years or so. So it's very disturbing to me. I don't think we can survive as a society that has this sort of bourgeois kind of upper middle class and then this sort of struggling, kind of lower middle class. We really have to address that. Most of my work as a therapist has been with working class folks, so I kind of take that personally, that I really feel some responsibility to try to help and try to make a difference in that regard. So I'm real concerned about the sort of declining kind of working class, middle class, relative to the upper middle class. We're being spied on by our own government, and this is something that I've just really become aware of over the last several months, especially because of the Edward Snowden revelations, but the information's been out there for a while. I'm just very concerned that perhaps it is because of this social alienation that the government is now more and more involved in kind of keeping track of us. I read an article over the weekend about the 30 ways that government or business can now spy on people. And there are all these very ingenious ways, but they're not far-fetched at all. For instance, kind of spying on you through your cell phone, or hacking into your computer, or being able to hack into your car or something like that. So it's really getting kind of scary as far as that goes. And I'm concerned that as we fragment as a society, that the sort of surveillance state is going to grow even more. And that's not the kind of world I want to live in. That's not the kind of world I want my children to inherit. So I'm real worried about that, and I want to do something about community so that that surveillance situation doesn't grow even more. And that's a relatively new phenomenon that we're all kind of finding out about, and I don't think people really are aware. I've done a lot of research on it. I don't think people really are aware of the extent of the surveillance state and just how invasive it really is getting. Okay. The entertainment culture is something that really bothers me, and this is how I know. I guess I'm an old guy. I'm 53 years old. I guess I watch some of what passes for entertainment, and my first reaction is, why is that even legal? I can't believe it's on television. I mean, there should be some obscenity law or something. I guess I'm just kind of overwhelmed by the decadence in entertainment. Particularly the kind of the popular culture. But I think we're seeing a degradation of women. I think we're seeing a music culture that's become very depressogenic, very iatrogenic to community health. And the thing that concerns me the most about it is that we tolerate it. I guess I just don't understand why, as a community, we're tolerating so much garbage, that I think is really harmful to the soul and to the spirit. So hopefully people aren't watching that. They're watching Access Nashua for some more wholesome and interesting stuff. But this whole kind of Miley Cyrus kind of phenomenon really disturbs me. I think, people kind of laugh that off, but I get actually really depressed about it. I really feel like it's a symbol of something that's really gone, kind of wrong. So again, this is maybe the old guy perspective here. Maybe I'm a father speaking. Maybe I'm a therapist speaking here. But I'm kind of seeing a coarsening of the entertainment culture that I think is really, and in sports as well. I think that even in the sports culture, we've seen kind of a coarsening of that. I remember, being a young guy, and the values in sports, the expressions that we would see are very different than they are today. And I find some of that to be kind of troubling, that we're really allowing some of that to contaminate what could be really a wholesome institution. So I'm concerned about kind of sports. I see personal integrity declining. The latest situation is President Obama with the health care rollout, and it's clear to me that he seemed to deliberately lie over and over again to sell it. And he, basically his people admitted that he kind of lied because that's the only way it would sell. So that really bothers me that my president would do that. A lot of people say, "Oh, Kevin, you're just, all politicians lie. What's wrong with you? Are you have your head in the sand?" And I say, well, no, I just kind of don't expect my president to lie to me over and over again. So I did a blog on that on Patch, Nashua Patch, which you can find on Patch if you search for it. And the focus of the piece was, have we just begun to tolerate lying? Is lying now the new norm? Is lying no longer deviant? Are we just tolerating lying as, oh well, that's just what everybody does to get ahead? It certainly seems to me that much of the media is giving President Obama a big pass on this. Not all the media, but some I think really is. And that concerns me because I think the media should be more of a watchdog, and I think there should be kind of a national outcry about that. So I'm really concerned that we allow that. Not just President Obama, but business, entertainment, people applying for jobs, kids cheating on, in high school on tests. Lying just seems to be almost the acceptable practice these days, and I just don't know how a civilization can survive if there's so much lying going on. So that bothers me. So not just lying, but just kind of personal integrity, consistency, and responsibility. Those things seem to be kind of fading for a lot of people, and it really concerns me that our systems are not encouraging more integrity that way. Okay. Incarceration rates are through the roof. I mean, the United States, I know this is depressing stuff, folks, but I'm just trying to lay it out here because I think these are some indicators that are out there. Our incarceration rates are through the roof. We incarcerate far more than anybody else in the world, like 4 times as many people as the next closest country or something like that. A lot of them are kind of drug-related offenses and things like that, but we're just locking a lot of people up. If we didn't incarcerate so many people, we would probably find our unemployment rate is actually a lot higher. In fact, a European friend of mine said that to me one time when I was bragging about our relatively low unemployment rate. And he said, well, that's because you have so many people incarcerated. And I thought, wow, maybe that's actually true. So I'm not sure why do we have a legal system or do we have a justice? I'm not really sure why we feel the need to incarcerate so many people, or is it really something really wrong with our society such that we're having to lock so many people up? So I'm certainly concerned about that. In the last 10 years, I've been looking at the data. I'm sure many of you have as well. Our educational attainment is declining relative to the rest of the world. If you looked at where the United States was, up through the 70s and the 80s, pretty much on every indicator, United States students were near the top. Math and science, creativity and reading, and we really were achieving quite well, but really we've taken a real nosedive in the last 10 years or so, particularly in the math and sciences. So domestically born Americans, are achieving at much lower rates than immigrants or than other people from around the world. So, and people really want to blame the educational system for that, and I'm tending to think more in terms of, I think there's some fault to be laid there, but I'm tending to think more in terms of the people themselves, that we're raising an uneducable group of people. So I think it's our fault as much as it is the educational system, but I want to talk more about that on some shows about what's happening in the education system and what could be done differently to perhaps improve those educational outcomes. And I'm sure that we could have probably 50 shows just on that, and there's a lot of kind of meat there to talk about that. But I'm real concerned that those educational outcomes really are declining, okay, and they're declining rapidly. Welfare and disability rates, the unemployment number is high, but especially since President Obama has been in office, the welfare rates have just skyrocketed. I read today that the disability rate, people that are on SSI or SSDI, is the highest it's ever been in history by far. We have more people on disability in the United States than there are people in the country of Greece, for instance, right? So it's about 10 million people in the United States are on disability. I don't think that's a promising sign. I'm a therapist, so I know how to help people get on disability. It's not really that hard. If you have a good doctor and a good lawyer, a lot of people make it onto disability. We have a group of people that are disabled that can't work, can't function, and they need some help. But there's a lot of people that I think, given the economy is so bad, we're sort of driving people into this sort of pseudo-economy almost. And the tragedy with disability, or with welfare as well, is that once you get on, it really is hard to get off. So I'm concerned that social services is growing, and that we're doing that for reasons that we think are maybe benevolent, but the long-term effects on society, I think, are going to be pretty serious. So I'm very concerned about that. Okay. Most people believe our foreign policy is a mess. President Obama was actually doing quite well. That was one area where people were rating him highly, but really in the last 6 months, he's taken a nosedive. There was a Pew study that came out today that most people now think that we really just don't know what we're doing in the world. Most people think we should really back off of our interventionist policies. Most people believe that we're spending too much money overseas. Most people believe that we should not be the world's policeman. So there's a lot of shifting in terms of foreign policy. But my sense is that it's just sort of a mess, and we're in this kind of redefinition period about what we're supposed to do. But I'm in the camp that believes that we have tried kind of intervention for the last 100 years or so. And there's been obviously some powerful successes there, but I feel like we've gone way too far, and now we need to really rethink our entire foreign policy. I think there's an arrogance of America that's kind of coming across now with the spying on top of that, and I think it's really got us in trouble with the rest of the world. So I'm concerned about that. That's something that may work itself out over time, but to me it is a sign that something is really changing and shifting in society, and it's something we really need to address. Probably the most important thing, I feel as if we're on the verge of a kind of an economic disaster, and I read the newspaper and I see the debt, $200 trillion in liability, and almost $18 trillion in debt. Deficits over $1 trillion. I think, oh my gosh, I mean, things are just out of control. There's no way the dollar can withstand this. At some point, the whole thing's going to collapse. It's almost like a Ponzi scheme. Yet, I look at what the politicians are doing, and they're complaining more about the debt ceiling than about addressing kind of this economic morass that we're in. So I really think we're on the verge of an economic kind of Armageddon, and I think people are just afraid to deal with it. And in order to get elected, you have to keep promising things. So that probably is the biggest challenge I think we face. But I think there's a psychology with that as well that's really damaging. And I think that people are afraid. And I think that there's a seductiveness of money that's getting in the way. But I think there's sort of this American ideal of we can do anything we want. There are no limits. Don't hold back. And I think that that's really getting us in trouble. And I think that we have to start thinking in terms of restraint. Okay, so those are some of the things I'm concerned about. Overriding with that is we're a country that's we're a divided country. There really is a kind of red-blue thing happening out there. It's very scary to me. I heard one commentator talk about that we may be at a place we were almost before the Civil War, because there's really this people are just kind of disagreeing on everything. There's a polarity out there that's really kind of scary. As a family therapist, I've always really worked towards helping families come together and stay together. But I'm really just concerned that that's, we're struggling with that there's this kind of hostility, and that there's a demonization that's going on. I ran for office last year in Portsmouth, and I didn't get into any criticism with my opponent, but statewide there was a tremendous amount of kind of personal attack politics that went on that I found really distasteful. It wasn't about issues; it really was about personal attack. He or she's trying to take something away from you, and I thought it was very distasteful and harmful to the whole process. So we're a country that's kind of divided, and we're kind of a cynical people. And there are even some people that are suggesting that maybe we're just a country that's not going to be able to hold together. That maybe we should be talking about nullification or secession or something like that. There are a lot of people in New Hampshire who hold that view, that maybe we're just not going to be able to kind of stay together, that maybe we've just gotten too big over time. So that's a very controversial area, but I'll probably have some guests on that will talk about that, about this idea of how big is too big. Are we like the Soviet Union that couldn't kind of hold itself together? Are we getting so kind of out of control? And will states choose that prerogative to try to split? So, I feel as if we're getting near that place where people are talking about those issues, particularly with regards to kind of the federal government versus states and municipalities. So, I think we're in desperate times, and I want the show to be about talking about solutions, so that we don't really get to that place where people are going to really want to take it to that next step, okay? So I find all these to be kind of a stunning wake-up call, and my biggest frustration in life is that I don't see people reacting with the sense of urgency that I think really is needed. I'm really concerned about, my kids' future, and I feel like we need to do some things now to make a big difference, and I don't see us doing those things, and it has me really concerned that we're not. So I'd like this show to be a wake-up call for people, to kind of raise people's anxiety a bit about what's going on out there, but also to be about solutions and about ways that we can go about making some changes, okay? I feel as if we started to make some progress, but I believe that the sort of Bush and Obama years have really been a regression. I feel like we've really gone backwards in the last 10 years. My bias, being a kind of common sense conservative, is we've really gone backwards in the last 5 years. I really feel like President Obama is kind of a polarizing figure, and I'm very concerned that we're not getting any better. So I think we're going in the wrong direction, and we need to kind of reverse course pretty quickly if we're going to survive as a country. So this is where common sense community building comes in. So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit and talk about what I mean by common sense community building. But community building is a kind of a change philosophy, and common sense community building is that change philosophy, but I've added my spin, kind of superimposed my spin onto it. And again, it's more of a deconstruction philosophy rather than an addition philosophy. I think we're done with all the adding. We need to talk about what we need to change or what we need to kind of pare back a little bit, okay? So I'm going to cheat a little bit and look at here. Community building is an interpersonal exchange of energies that increases the capacity of institutions, groups, and families to contribute to a better functioning whole. So it's sort of adding some energy to a situation, like a therapist would do, or like a teacher would do, or like a coach would do, to really improve the capacity of that organization or that system. So community builders are out there in the world kind of mobilizing people in such a way to create some changes so that they function function better. So an example of that would be to kind of empower people to speak their mind a little bit more. The buy local movement was an example of of community building. Let's get people to buy products locally to support local people. Motivating teachers to be more excited about their jobs, for instance, would be kind of a community building approach. Okay, so that's kind of traditional, standard community building, and there's a lot of it happening around the country. Over the last 10 years, it's kind of a burgeoning movement. There are organizations like the Search Institute in Minnesota and America's Promise that are doing this kind of on a community-wide basis, a town-wide basis, even a statewide basis, and it's been pretty effective, and more effective than some of the therapies that we're throwing at people. The idea, another term for community building would be capacity building. So what are we doing to increase the capacity of our communities to sort of be what is needed for the people that live there? Okay, so community building and capacity building are kind of the same. My spin, again, kind of a deconstructionist spin, is that it's a process that attempts to deconstruct the institutional and psychological barriers that interfere with the effective functioning of the civil society. So this is my libertarian kind of bent. I kind of feel like there's so many barriers that are getting in the way of people just kind of being people. We have regulations, we have laws, we have all these kind of psychological systems that are in the way. We have competing loyalties, business interests versus government interests. And I feel like there's so much junk getting in the way of communities being able to kind of function well. And then a big part of what we really need to do is to just remove some of those barriers. I really believe in the civil society, and I believe that the founders were right, that the United States is about a functioning civil society. We weren't designed to be a government-centric system. We were designed to be kind of a neighborhood system, people kind of helping each other as good neighbors. So we had to remove some of those government or other institutional barriers so that people can be, good neighbors. So think of it this way: if you're, involved in a club or something like that, and you'd really like to get to know the person sitting next to you, but the rules of the club are such that you're not allowed to have a conversation with the person next to you, or the leader of the group of the club has an agenda, or something is happening that you can't just talk to the person next to you. That's kind of how I see community building, that we've had all these kind of third-party barriers, lawyers, doctors, therapists, all these people sort of doing all these professional things, and they're getting in the way of just people being people together. So I want to remove a lot of that stuff. So it's a bit of a libertarian attitude with a kind of a 60s utopianism thrown in, that I really do believe that people would thrive if left to their own devices, if they could just kind of be there for each other. And we've become so reliant on government and professionalization that we're really kind of getting in the way. That's the central premise of my book, by the way, is that we would thrive if we could remove a lot of the barriers that are getting in the way of people just being kind of human together. So that's the basic philosophy I want to promote. The challenge that we're facing so far is this is where all the money is, right? So this is where the funding comes for traditional community building. It's hard to get this recognized because, again, we're not adding new stuff, new programs, new practices, new people, new jobs. We're just sort of eliminating things. So it's very difficult to get something like this funded. Although I think it's possible that in a changing climate that some states might actually find this pretty attractive as a way of kind of reducing, particularly because I think, since President Obama has been in and since we've had a progressive, big P progressive burst, people might start to say, we're trying a lot of stuff, but maybe we ought to kind of cut back a little bit more. And maybe there could be a shift in energies. That's what I'm hoping will happen. I'm hoping to be, contribute to that voice to really shift energies to kind of deconstruct rather than add. So that's the basic philosophy. I'm going to just do a couple of the tenets of that philosophy. And I don't want to bore you too much with all of that. I'll just go for a little bit while longer. But I want to give you a couple of the tenets just so you kind of have that in mind. But I'll be glad to send this presentation to you. You can go to my website, kevinkervick.com. You can also find me on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter. My my blog on Patch. I'll be glad to send all these notes to you, the presentation itself, or anything if it might be helpful to you. So don't feel like you need to write anything down, as I tell my students. I'm just going to cover a couple bullet points, and then we'll call it an evening, okay? You know, Common Sense Community Builders have faith in a decentralized community. We really believe that less central planning, the better. We believe that free people make better neighbors. We don't abide this idea that you have to make people be good neighbors, right? We think that free people decide to be good neighbors. And in fact, we're really concerned that all this coerced charity is getting in the way of really helpfulness. And this is the area where the libertarians particularly like this approach, because they reject kind of the central planning approach that says, you have to kind of make people be nice to each other. Okay. We have faith in individuals. We support personal responsibility rather than entitlement. So I'm concerned that we've developed kind of an entitlement society. And this is really, goes back 100 years, but particularly over the last 60 years. We've sort of developed this attitude that somebody owes me something, and I'll get better if I get something from somebody. We push hard against that. We push towards personal responsibility. That's how I do therapy, by the way. I really challenge people. I try to understand where they're coming from, but I really challenge them to take responsibility for their own lives and to make a difference in their own life. So our approach really embodies that as well. We're focusing on natural supports rather than kind of government systems or third-party systems. God knows we have enough therapists and teachers and police officers and lawyers and all these caseworkers and social workers. Well, we have more people out there, professionals doing more things than we ever had, and I'm not sure we're making it much of a difference. So we're really focusing on natural supports in the community. The person you see down the street, maybe you're like a pastor or something like that, but just somebody that's sort of in your community that can really make a difference for you. We want to get away from professionalization, which I think has grown way kind of out of control. It avoids the political correctness and the language of victimization. A big part of what goes wrong with community building is we're so concerned about not hurting anybody's feelings, kind of getting in the way of what you're supposed to say all the time, that I think we really struggle just kind of being honest with each other. So we really are going to try to get away from the language of victimization, the language of political correctness. And if I had to levy one main criticism at my field, or with the kind of progressive kind of posturing in general, it would be this. So much focus on PC kind of language and this sort of victimization mindset. I just think that's disempowering to people. It hasn't helped, and it really has been dividing the country more. I think President Obama, unfortunately, has fed into this, and it really has contributed to polarization. So I'm really concerned about that. So we try to get away from that. We try to evangelize our ideas. We use as many social mediums as possible, this being one. So we want to really get out there and work in community centers and other systems, use media, use the internet. We really want to be idea evangelizers and use as much media as necessary. We're trying to build connections rather than divisions, so we're looking for commonality. We know when to say no. If we're really evangelizing and we're not being heard, that's just really time to move on. And I'm sure the other person would agree. Okay. Okay, we don't shy away from controversy, but we're also not interested in just jumping into controversy. We really want to, speak the truth to people. And sometimes the truth is hard to hear, but we really want to speak the truth. And sometimes people respond really well. If they hear truth, they find that that's attractive to them. So we want to try to stay away from mushying up the language with nothing and kind of speak truth, especially speak truth to power. Okay, what the result of our approach is that it builds leadership, it taps resilience, so we want to tap individual resilience. It empowers people that maybe feel like they're kind of the silent majority, but nobody is really talking to them. We really want to empower those people rather than the loudest kind of voices. And sometimes that's really exciting for people to know that there's somebody that's on their side. So I want this show to be one way that we're reaching out to people out there that feel like they don't have a voice, or that might say, I've always been wanting to say that, but I never felt I could say that out loud, or I never really felt anybody would listen. So we really want to reach out to people like that. So if you're one of those people out there, please watch the show and please contribute, and maybe consider being a guest on the show. We'd like to really resonate with what you're experiencing and like to get you involved in the community, okay? We hope that we're going to contribute to responsibility and that contribute to people actually taking charge of their own lives and helping their neighbors. So sort of the corollary of John Kennedy's famous, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Our attitude would be is, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for yourself and what you can do for your neighbors. So we really want to get the third parties out of it, work with people on a person-to-person level. Okay, so that's the basic idea. Those are the bullet points I wanted to cover, and I hope that is giving you an idea of what I want the show to be about. I've covered kind of a lot of areas, but I wanted to give you a snapshot of my philosophy and the types of guests that I'm going to be inviting and some of the issues that we're really going to be covering. But also to share with you just a sense of urgency that I'm feeling really about the world and wanting to do something to try to make a difference, because I really feel like we're at a breaking point, or at a tipping point, where if we don't do something soon that we really could, could lose the whole country. For more information about me, you can go to my website at www.kevinkervick.com. You can also find me on Facebook and Twitter. If you'd like to give me a phone call, you can call me at 603-319-1035. That's 603-319-1035. You can also find me on Nashua Patch. I have a blog called Kevin Kervick's blog on Nashua Patch, and feel free to check me out there.